Hello, everyone. Welcome to Waiting for Game, weekly podcast from Melee Stats. I am your new host for one episode because our good friend Gimme That Wheat is on a road trip, trapped on the side of a road somewhere, maybe. Who knows where he is? But we have a very fun episode for you today. I have with me none other than the fabled Dr. Piggy. How are you doing?
I'm great, and I'm excited to talk about my research because that's one of those. It's one of those things I could just talk about forever, and I never know if it's the right audience. If you're at a Smash party and you start talking about your research, you wonder like how much is this person listening to me because they're being polite, and how much is because they're really like into the psychology of Smash or gender
Yeah, yeah.
dynamics or whatever. So
Well, you are on the right show for this. For those of you who do not know, I did my undergrad in cognitive science, and I did my thesis project on Super Smash Bros. Melee. So there's a special place in my heart for people like Dr. Piggy, who thread the needle of the intersection between academia and Smash. Um, it's a very small but very passionate group of people that exist within this intersection, and our shows usually go pretty long. We're trying to keep that like shorter these days, but that's not always how it pans out because everyone just loves to talk when we talk to them. Um, so you don't have to feel worried about talking too long.
okay, okay.
But yeah. So like she mentioned, I am very excited because we're mostly just going to be talking about Kyle's thesis paper, um, which we're gonna run through the whole topics. We're gonna talk about Smash and academia in general. Um, very very full ticket of fun things to talk about today. Um, so I guess let's just jump right into it. I think that you know I'm interested in your thoughts just about the intersection point between Smash and academia because I feel like it's not exactly like a non-existent space. There are like a number of very interesting people that are doing academic work within Smash, but I'm interested like in your perspective of like what drew you to that, like what do you think has potential to be really interesting work within the community and within academia? So, what do you think? Let me start with that.
Yeah. So this actually reminds me of discussion. There was like a couple months ago, there was some moment on Twitter where people were like freaking out because some business was offering certification for esports, something or other, like leadership or whatever. And a lot of people rightfully pointed out that a lot of the ways to get into esports are actually go get a skill, get trained in it, and then use it in esports, right? And it's kind of the same thing for academia in my view. You don't like walk in saying, okay, I'm going to do something with Smash, because then you'll end up going nowhere because it's massive, right? We've got community aspect, we've got the game itself, we've got skill learning. All of these things are happening at once. But if you walk in and you say, okay, I study how our physical body relates to the world, and then I'm going to use Smash as an example, or uh, I study or I program machine learning algorithms, and I'm going to use it to see if I can train a computer to be like Mango. Like doing something is probably the best way to get into Smash and academia, and I'm no exception. So I did my undergrad in psych at U Chicago, graduated 2015, and then I applied for grad programs, and I wanted to study the neuroscience of creativity. So I am in this lab where we do brain scans and have like these very exact tasks and everything. And I wanted to know, like, okay, well, when people are under pressure, how do they perform? Um, Turns out it's very hard to replicate pressure. It's hard to replicate pressure in a lab setting, and so I ended up coming to Smash because in my everyday life, when I went to a tournament, I would see people willingly over and over again put themselves in super high pressure situations, and so it was sort of like my first year project failed. Where can I find this effect in real life? And suddenly, I'm a Smash researcher. It took time, but 4 years of going to tournaments and collecting data, talking to smashers, figuring out what makes people tick. Definitely, it's weird that I got a PhD in Smash, but yeah, that's where I'm at. So
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because I think that like my own experience is like very similar. Um, I think Coxeye is I think a very funny, at least the way it was in my undergrad because it's very interdisciplinary, right? The way that my field works, and we had to like design our own programs around like each individual department or whatever, so that you couldn't just take like intro linguistics, intro education, intro whatever, like and just take like 50 intro classes and then graduate.
Yeah, yeah.
So they always taught us to like think of it in terms of the problem, right?
Mhm.
Like if you have a problem, learn what you need to learn to solve like or to make headway on that problem, and then like do a project around a problem.
Yeah.
That was like one of the first things we learned like as cogsci people. And I just think that Smash is so funny because it's like full of problems, right? I just think that like it's like you mentioned, like if you have any skill at all, um Smash is just this like endless well of potential applications for ideas. Like you mentioned like machine learning um as a potential avenue. I don't know if you just like pulled that out of your hat or anything, but I know that like XPilot is like the one example that comes to mind immediately. He's a like a he worked in Josh Tenenbaum's lab at MIT, and
Hmm.
now he
Hmm.
works at DeepMind. And he made a his thesis work was Philip, the machine learning you know agent to play Super Smash Brothers, and he like beat up all the top players at that one shrine that he went to. So it's really just like whatever skill you have applied to whatever formalized problem within the community you can think of. There's really just like a lot of avenues for that. Like I think like MPGR is a really interesting example. Just like mathematically, the example of like interpolating between players and like sorting the graph where everyone's connected. Like mathematically, it's like a very interesting construct, and it's very
Hmm.
very hard for machines to do it. Um, just like those are things that like come to mind for me immediately. But like I just think that it's super funny that like there's not more honestly, because I just think that like if you have any connection to this Smash community at all, I just feel like there's all this discourse every day around like arbitrary topics, and like you can just pick something and make headway on it, and it's super super interesting.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a big generational shift soon because, like, right, I've been gaming since the 90s, and it wasn't like quite as big as it is now, for example. So right now, there are a lot of kids, or I say kids, but there's a lot of people in college that like grew up on Minecraft, and there's like way more people that grew up on gaming than there used to be. And so it's funny because now if I'm like writing a grant or trying to convince a professor that my work is important, I have to like talk in a very like video games don't cause violence, or like frame it in a different way. Like, oh yes, I'm a cognitive scientist. I study skill learning in video gamers. Like, but as soon as we get more and more people in here that care about these issues, I think there's going to be a real explosion, and I'm
Yeah,
excited for that.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
when the department chair at like whatever university you go to is someone that like grew up playing video games and don't
yeah,
just think that they're what their kid plays when they're not behaving or whatever.
yeah.
um Yeah, Minecraft is a really funny example because Minecraft, I think, is a game that's like actually huge right now in the research space. I know that like NeurIPS, the machine learning conference, there's like a big competition for like designing an agent to be able to navigate Minecraft or
Oh,
like
that's
a
awesome.
pared down Minecraft environment.
Mm.
But it's like yeah, there's all sorts of stuff popping up. I think it's becoming, I think, a little bit more legitimized as a problem space, which I think is really really cool.
Yeah.
Um, I also think there's a lot of really interesting like community type work. I know that Spoopy has done a bunch of very very interesting work on just like the culture
Hmm.
surrounding the game as well.
Hmm.
Um, I really think that there's like just like a lot to explore there with regards to what could really really be written about. I think.
Oh yeah, and I'm like, don't go off on this tangent, but I'm like, wait, he gave me permission to
Yeah,
go off on
please
this
go on the
tangent.
tangent.
Okay, so that makes me think of how like the scene has shifted. Like, okay, so my spouse got in on the Brawl days, and there's an extreme. The community is so different. It's so much bigger. There's I mean, gaming communities have always been kind of young, but like it used to be that you could really end up in somebody's house and you would trust them. And at this point, not everybody knows everybody anymore, right? There have been giant shifts in like norms and culture and trust, and yes, there's so much there. And my work looks a little bit at that, but it looks at the individual level versus like Spoopy did an ethnography, which is like you immerse yourself in the culture, you understand all of these different forces at work, both external and internal, and then bring it all together and try to explain why are Smashers the way we are? Why do we still play on CRTs? Well, or do we? And why do we still play on GameCube controllers? Or do we? Right? Like, You did work on monitors, right?
Yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
this is it's sort of adjacent to my work, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
the thesis that I did in undergrad was about input latency perception.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I have like a bit of overlap here, right? Because we both do expertise and expert performance
Mm-hmm.
type work, right? I
Yeah.
remember we had a chat about the Oxford Handbook.
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Okay, yeah,
very very
I don't have
very
it
good.
with me, but it's this big old thick book that's like great articles about how people learn at all sorts of in all sorts of
Yeah,
ways.
yeah.
Yeah.
But what I studied was more like a temporal visio-motor perception.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a very interesting topic because I think that a lot of people they look at the numbers for monitors, like this is like without any lag fix or whatever
Mm-hmm.
codes. But they look at like, oh, it's delayed by 4 milliseconds. Surely you cannot perceive that. It's 4 milliseconds. Surely you can't perceive it. And I'm just like, oh, dude, perception makes no sense.
No, it
You
does.
can't you can't say surely for anything, dude. Um, I went down this big rabbit hole of like trying to prove to people whether one was plausible or not, and it's like there's all this stuff about like stitching together temporal events in your head so that they appear synchronized. It's like really really fascinating stuff. Um,
Our brains are
very
the
very
most
complicated.
powerful machine, right? We're
Yes.
talking about machines. Our brains are infinitely more complex than anything we can make right
Yeah.
now.
Most of what I do now professionally is like AI machine learning type work, mostly like machine perception type stuff. Um, and like one thing that I keep trying to tell people, because there's always like these ideas about like, oh, this thing will work.
Mhm.
I think this thing will work because when I look at it, it looks like it will work. Um, like, oh, this looks great. This looks like the machine will definitely think this once it looks at it. And I'm like, oh, you don't know about visual perception. You don't know how much legwork is being done to make you think that these two things look the same. Just like I always try to like link people to just optical illusions. Just like, oh,
Yeah,
please just read optical illusions. These
yeah,
things do not fool machine learning models because they don't have, you know, uh, heuristics at play to make
right,
you think certain things.
right.
Um,
They are
but yeah,
literally just going off the, the stimulus, the input, the
yeah, yeah,
literal thing drawn on the page. Whereas our brains are like, oh, if a pencil is over here and then the eraser's over here, they should connect, right? And then it's like, oh no,
yeah, yeah,
no, it doesn't.
yeah. That one in particular, I think I remember reading a study that that's actually a learned thing. Because like the idea of like objects being connected when occluded, that's actually not inductive.
Yeah.
That was very cool research where it was like they looked at like looking times for
Mm-hmm.
infants, like the
Yes,
standard
baby,
rate.
baby,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
But they're actually it's like it appears more like around like age like like 12 months or something. I don't exactly remember when, but the if you like have like a book and like you have like a pencil that appears
Mm-hmm.
like this and
Mm-hmm.
like if they move separately that's really weird to
Mm-hmm.
adults because it's like oh that should be the same thing,
Yeah.
but infants don't have that. It's very
No.
interesting. um, but yeah, sorry, we're both sort of tangenting I think a little bit, but I think that's sort of what we had in mind for this episode. So I do want to talk a little bit about your work,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that I want to get to that as fast as possible because I feel like
Okay.
we're going to be there for a long time.
All right.
So give me a quick rundown of like elevator pitch of your work. I know it's like 100 something pages, so like it's like very hard to condense all of that down to a sentence or whatever. But let's tell the viewer at home what they should be expecting from the rest of this episode.
Great. Yeah. So there's more work that I've done than what's in the dissertation. But generally, what I tell people is I study the process of skill acquisition in competitive video game players. Specifically, I look at what are the cognitive, social, and emotional factors that impact the skill acquisition process. So that's like a long sentence, but it sort of encompasses. I'm interested. How do people get good? And when I say how, I mean not only what practice routines are they doing, what strategies are they taking to learning the game, or do they study frame data. I also mean how, like, with what friends or social support, and I mean how with, like, do they keep going even when they hit their plateau? Do they get so salty that they quit, or all of those things contribute to skill. And I think in expertise literature, there's always been these discussions of practice versus talent, right? Like, oh, if you were naturally born with a faster reaction time, then you're going to be better at these skills, right? Um, but we know that practice is huge, and that practice and talent certainly influence each other. But practice isn't as simple as go put in your 5 hours, right? Anybody who's tried to learn this game or any skill, if you can see, I have a piano in the background, and that was my first experience with skill learning processes and how frustrating it is when it just doesn't just work the first time, right? So, yeah, I'm generally that research has taken me in several different directions. I've asked players to spit into tubes so that I can measure their stress response to see how much their body is preparing them for a tournament weekend. And I brought 20 women into the lab at a time to run a novice tournament, and the room has been filled with laughter, and they leave thinking a little bit differently about video games. And all of those things contribute to somebody's ability to actually end up playing and being good, and maybe even top 100.
Very cool. Yeah, I think we'll get to it. It's like a little bit further down in the topics list, but I definitely read the novice tournament part of your thesis, and I was geeking out. I thought it was the coolest thing of all time. Um, but yeah, no, I think that that's really interesting, and I think that I always tell people that the process of getting good at Smash in general is it's very interesting because the reward signal is so bad compared to other things that you normally get good at,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's like it's very difficult to measure how you are improving at Smash relative to other things. Um, you know, like if you implement like a new technique or a new idea in a matchup or something, it's so difficult to see like, oh, this will make me win more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the actual like appearance of reward after you implement something is like so like abstracted away further down the line.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this line of research is super interesting because it's like what type of people are able to persevere through like this very very not kind learning environment where
Mm-hmm.
it's dependent on a lot of internal abstraction. I know like a lot of people have different opinions about this, about how like easy it is to learn melee at a high level or whatever, but I do think that it's a very interesting to see what patterns emerge. uh, so yeah, so that's really really exciting stuff. I have a lot of notes. I crammed your thesis
You didn't
earlier
have to.
today.
I would have
No,
explained it to you, yeah, or anybody.
yeah. um, but I do have a lot of very fun things that I'm interested in talking about.
Oh,
But let's like jump into like the first big topic of your thesis.
mm-hmm.
Uh, and I guess that's the idea of like anxiety versus performance, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because this is something I think is pretty intuitive when you say it to people. I think the other two are a little bit less intuitive, but it's also like very cool research. And it's like very important for laying a foundation for the other two.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about that anxiety versus performance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think at some point in our lives, each of us experience anxiety or nerves or choking, right? Whether it's on the SATs, ACTs, or my undergrad advisor, it happened to her when she was doing Olympic tryouts for soccer. She was a goalie and she just totally choked. And or in video games, when you're playing way below, you're missing the combos that you normally hit every time. And what's happening there, right? Um, what's interesting is that it's more complicated than just uh, than it seems. For example, the reasons that an expert golfer might choke are different from the reasons a novice golfer might choke. The reasons you forget something and blank when you're after a night of cramming, and when you blank on something basic like I don't know your name, these are all actually different cognitive mechanisms. And what I find really fascinating about Smash in particular is that not only do we have this motor component, which traditionally you anxiety interferes with the motor component when you're overthinking otherwise automatic processes, right? But then Smash also has a super big demand on the cognitive component of trying to predict what your opponent's going to do next, varying your own strategy, and there's all these things going on in your head and your hands when you're playing. So there's so many different ways that you can fail. Is basically what I'm
Yeah, yeah,
saying. And you can, if you overthink, if you start focusing on your sweaty hands or your inputs that you otherwise wouldn't focus on, that's gonna not only mess up your inputs but also mess up how much brain space you have more or less, to think about the game in front of you, right? So there's obviously what I'm just talking about are like some really short-term effects of anxiety, right? Like if you're going on stream for the first time, it's your first national level tournament, and somehow you got lined up against the first seed in your pool, so now you're gonna go play on stream and get destroyed, right? Like that is
Stressful.
physiologically stressful. Like your body is responding to this threat you're perceiving, and it's valid. It is a threat to your well performance and your ego and all these other things, right? Um, so generally speaking, I think most of us would agree that the with the idea that anxiety harms performance. But I think something that's interesting to consider is that we might all agree on that because we already really care about Smash. So if you were, say, somebody that really didn't like video games, but somehow you ended up on stream, like you might be nervous because you're being perceived and you might be being judged by people. There might be an evaluative anxiety component, but there's much less of a performance anxiety component. But because all of us in Smash are already pretty motivated to play or to win or to get better, whatever reason we're here, that means that most of the time anxiety is going to push us past the level of like awareness, alertness that you need to be able to compete. Um, some people talk about a U-shaped curve, like, oh, if you're sleepy, you're not going to play well,
Yeah.
and if you're too hyped, you're not going to play well.
Is that
And
Yerkes Dodson, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
you're just oxen curve, but and there you know there's some evidence that, like, for example, our stress hormones line up with the Yerkes-Dodson curve. Like there's an ideal amount of cortisol you circulating in your body in order to be at a good performance level. But like not everything follows that curve. So it's a little oversimplified, but it's a good way to think of it. Sometimes you need more anxiety. You need some anxiety. You need to care, but you shouldn't have too much.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Finding that
Um,
balance is very fun.
yeah.
Yeah.
So in that first chapter of my dissertation, actually, what is one chapter has turned into 3 papers. By the way, it was very hard to chop it all up for a dissertation. But so one study is literally I asked everybody after every tournament game they played, how anxious, how much energy do you have right now? Are you feeling positive or negative? Did you choke that last match? How did you feel about your play? And I did that for about 100 people at two or three national tournaments. And a local. And I did find that when somebody rated themselves, like they just finished their second set of the tournament and they're saying, "Oh, I'm really hyped up," they do worse on their third set. Um, and that's, I mean, to me, that's some evidence that like how we how we how we play and what our bodies are experiencing is important to our performance. That finding still stands even when you control for their the seed difference, right? So like I was just talking about with threat perception, if you're on stream, right? If you know you're going to play against the first seed, you're going to get anxious just because you feel like you're going to lose, right? And of course that has an impact on how anxious you rate yourself even after the game. But there is a component of what anxiety did you have anyway from other things, exogenous factors. So yeah, I thought that was cool that I actually could go into a tournament and I could ask people of all skill levels. You know, I had O2ers, I had people that turned in 17 because they did 17 tournament matches. They made it really far, right? And all across all of these people, there's something about getting overhyped that ends up interfering with their subsequent performance.
Yeah, this is I think one of the favorite parts that I had about this chapter in your thesis is the seeding threat, the perceived threat from seeding. So we're melee stats. We love seeding.
Yeah.
People in our circle are frequently involved with the seeding of national tournaments. So I saw
Mm-hmm.
this and I was like, obviously, I was very intrigued.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that this idea that like you could, see that you're about to play a top seed of an event, and then like have like a very elevated like cortisol response, in as a result of that, I think it was very relatable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it also made me think of this other paper that I had read. I think Jack Zell sent it to me like a long time ago. It's called "Selecting the Best." It's a paper out of I think Northwestern. Um, but this one, it was really funny because it like kind of corroborated a lot of what you were saying. They found that they did a similar study on elimination tournaments where instead of like the perceived threat of the person you were playing, it was they called it the shadow effect, which is basically the seed of the person that you would play after if you
Ah,
beat them.
interesting. Yeah,
So if you
yeah.
won your match, you would have to play a top seed in the next round.
Hmm.
Um, and this is a very interesting way to look at it because you can actually control for um, how good the player that you're playing before that person is.
Yeah,
And they found that like across the board, if you play someone with the idea that like next person you play is really really hard, you have a lower probability of winning because you're already experiencing the threat.
yeah, yeah,
Like that immediately jumped out at me when I read your thesis. I was like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense because
yeah.
the shadow effect, it's probably like already actively happening before you even get to that round.
Right?
Um, yeah,
Shadow effect. I should look that up.
yeah, I'll
I
link it to you after because I was just like, oh, this is so cool. I think I thought
Yeah.
that was
One
super
of my
cool.
reviewers was like, "So wait, there's space in between these tournament games, right? So how do you know that it's the one before that's affecting the subsequent and not some other?" Well, first of all, I found an effect. Okay,
Yeah,
but second of all,
reviewer two.
yeah, I know because yeah. Actually, it was reviewer one this time.
Oh
Was
no.
that it seemed like maybe they had recently like published something and they were like all up in a fuss that I didn't
Hmm.
follow their specific what
Yeah, yeah,
whatever academia.
yeah,
um, but yeah, that could be some ammunition in my revise and resubmit to be
yeah,
like,
yeah,
actually, there is evidence already.
yeah.
Oh, that's great.
But yeah, no, that was a super cool part of that. I know that there's a guy in our Discord who I think is in chat, SP99, who is just he always talks about seating and about how he hates it,
Mm.
which is very funny because like a lot of us are involved with like doing the seating, so we're like
Hmm.
SP, stop it. um, but he always talks about how seating should all be randomized
Oh
because
God.
the really good players get easy brackets because they get good seeds or whatever. I saw that you had that as a potential suggestion in the end of the seating part too. So I thought of SP99 when I read that as well. I was like,
So
oh yeah,
okay, yeah. So what's interesting, it, like I was saying, having to explain to a reviewer like what is Smash, what is double elimination bracket, what is seeding, why does it matter? Like that takes up so much like space in a paper,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so I feel like I have to dumb it down sometimes and just be like, seeding's how good it is. But I know, and I've sat in the same room when people are like reseeding because somebody had a regional conflict in a pool like 1 or 2 nights before the national tournament, right? Like seeding is not perfect, and as there have been a lot of people that have like tried to create an elo ranking or some kind of like universal ranking for Smash players, but we are just too there hasn't been enough crossover. Maybe it's different because of Slippy and the pandemic.
well, I
Maybe.
don't know. So I have a big write up about this. I
Oh,
don't know if
good.
you're handing me a layup. This is like one of
Foreshadowing.
yeah. um, but yeah, I think that there are definitely problems with Elo with regards to specifically how it works for double elimination
Oh yeah.
and for character differential. This is like
Oh yeah.
the two big ones, and also
Yeah.
like closed pools. Like all of these things like completely destroy most of the rating algorithms because the way that I like to think of it, right, is when you're doing like the ranking problem, it's kind of like you have this big connected graph, right? Where between like every player is a node in this graph, and the like the cord connecting two nodes is like the record that they
Hmm.
have, right? Um, and you could say that there's like a number of observations, and then win rate is the thing that connects every. There's like a two parameter cord. Um, and things like Elo kind of assume that like everyone's normally distributed and like everyone has the same number of matches, but
Or
like
that there's a lot of connection, there's a lot of
yeah,
chords, right? But
right,
we know that there's not, right? There's
yeah,
regional chords that are super strong, and then
right,
like there's 2 people that go out. Yeah,
yeah, and you have to make like a huge projection based off of that. And like I think even with Slippy, I think it's really funny to think about because like you have like things like Smash World Tour. I think are a really fun way to think about this, right? Because we have all these like regional, very interconnected. There's a lot more data now than there were like just a couple of years ago. But even so, like we have no idea how good Pipsqueak is relative to the rest of the United States because he only gets to play European players, and it's like how good is Leffen right now? Like I have no idea. Like I think he's really good. Uh, how's he gonna do at main stage? No one has any idea because like the pools are just like completely separated, and you have to like make all this like wild judgment based off of how good everyone is relative to each other.
yeah.
So I think seeding is like the very human attempt,
Yes.
uh, which I think is very fun. But I think
Yeah.
like just like as a mathematical construct, the ranking problem is super fascinating to me because it's like you really do just have to guess a lot of the time. And it's like
Right.
what methods do you use to make that guess as educated as possible? It's very
Yeah.
interesting.
And that's something that I've run into a lot as I'm writing up my papers. Is that okay? So my work is very field study, right? Like I'm not well. There is a study where I bring people into a lab and control the conditions, but like most of my data is I went out to Smash tournaments and saw people and I'm trying to draw conclusions about patterns of data, right? So that actually makes it really hard statistically because, like you're saying, how can you tell you improve? If you fixed some combo you always dropped or some input that you didn't, maybe you can quadruple shine at home, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is if your opponent can interrupt you somewhere in there, then it doesn't matter how many shines you can get off because your opponent like outplayed you. So basically no performance data is truly independent. Not at the match level, not at the player level, not at the regional level. Everybody is going against each other. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like chess has had a couple hundred years um, as a somewhat simpler game. In order for us to be able to say outright that somebody's more or less skilled, right?
Hmm.
But we're playing high speed chess with 7 colors,
Yeah.
and it's not turn based, right? Like anyway, it's very complex and there will always be mathematical problems to doing research in the field or looking at existing data and trying to make meaning out of it that just doesn't it's not the same problem when you are like building a computer algorithm from the ground up or when you're bringing people into the lab and manipulating how threatened they feel. Yeah.
For sure. Um, yeah. So I'm trying to look through my notes. Do you have any other like big overarching thoughts on the first chapter? Trying to see what
Oh,
else.
so I did find that anxiety, from game to game matters within people, but also that people who, oh, okay, I want to explain this correctly. So, when you feel anxious, there are many different things you can do, right? Maybe you pretend it's not happening. Maybe you really lean into it and get yourself uh, uh, in a worse off place, or maybe you have a way to deal with it. Like maybe you've been meditating, or you can exercise, or there's somebody you can just go and like tell all your worries to, and then you come back and feel refreshed, right? So our ability to cope or our ability to shape our own emotional experience is typically thought of in academia as either self-regulation or emotion regulation specifically. And so I was finding a trend that people with better emotion regulation tend to do better in the tournament. And of course, you could guess that that's because when they do feel anxiety, they deal with it better, and so they don't suffer performance. That might be, but it also might be that in order to get to a high level, you already had to have pretty good emotion regulation. You couldn't have given up when you plateaued. You couldn't have given up when you were totally embarrassed on stream. You had to keep going in order to keep learning and practicing, gaining skill, and then outplaying other people. So there does seem to be a relationship between emotion regulation, anxiety, and how people perform. But it's hard because you're looking at what's already happened, right? Going back, or maybe there's, does Z does Y cause Z? Does Z cause Y? Or does X cause both?
Yeah.
Who knows?
It's
Um,
like the survivor bias. It's very
yes,
difficult. Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah. I thought of this when I was thinking about. I remember halfway through that chapter there was you're finding that cognitive reappraisal is worse in really skilled players than it is in really unskilled players,
Hmm.
which I thought was just hilarious because like I just pictured like every top player having a meltdown.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I'm like, no, I need to think about this. This is we can make sense of this. It's probably survivorship bias because they had better emotion regulation. I was like, oh, that makes a little bit more sense. But
Yeah, it's interesting because so some of the things I talked about, like seeking social support or like having physical actions that you do to change your body's chemistry, right? Those are things you can learn, or and that different people have access to in different ways. So like if my spouse is at a tournament with me, I'm gonna be way better off than or like if I needed help or a hug or whatever, I'm gonna be better off. Um, so there are things you can do in between matches, right? But then when you're sitting on the Angel platform, having just lost your 3 stock lead, is that really the time where you're going to sit down and you're going to say, okay, in this situation, I am extremely stressed, but I need to remember that my family loves me even if I lose, right? Like there's a lot of self-talk that you don't have time for in the moment, or even sometimes between sets, depending on how hyped up you are, how much you need to calm down, and how much else is going on, right? If you've got people like coming on, if you lose, it's like a lot of top players are like, don't talk to me after I just lost on stream, right? And it's because you are hyped up and you can't, it's really hard to calm down. um, so yeah, there's going to be differences, but it might be that some people just are more reactive, right? And it could be that some people have learned some strategies that actually hurt instead of helping. So for example, catastrophizing or thinking, oh my God, all my friends are going to make fun of me when I go back to my region after this major, you know, like you don't know that yet, right? That's actually going to hurt you to have that kind of thought process. So yes, you could do something like sit there and remember, okay, my family's going to love me no matter what, but it takes a lot of energy. Versus there are some other strategies or just baseline reactivity that people have that could mean that you just have more emotions to deal with, or you're making it worse for yourself. And those are the things that seem to be harming performance. So in the case of Smash, when it takes so much energy to just play at all, um, I believe I'm thinking that the data is suggesting that the bad strategies hurt you, but the good strategies aren't like as good as it would be maybe in another context,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
in an interpersonal relationship or
Right.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I think that's very interesting. Uh, yeah, I am interested in this whole line of thinking
yeah.
about emotion regulation and performance. Because I do think that like it's very funny to think of it as like, blunt affect is like the self-selected thing because high pressure is so hard or whatever. Part of me wants to believe that there's like some way that like if you're a very emotional player, you can make it if you master your emotions or something. But I do think it's like a fun, way to approach the problem is to think about it in this way.
Well, I do think that emotional players can quote master your emotion, but I don't think it's like what people imagine when you might hear that. So you might think like, oh, I'll just feel less. That's not the goal.
Yeah,
The goal
yeah.
is when you have your feelings, you put them in the right direction. So, for example, there's been at least one study that found that when you're feeling anxious and hyped up, if you think about your energy levels as being excitement instead of dread, that is one way to help turn around some of the negative effects, right? And so I think being emotional shouldn't stop anybody. And in fact, it's extremely motivating, right? Like
Mhm.
if you care enough to get back into the next game, that's going to help you keep going. But it can also be too much in the moment. So this is like very huge, like open-ended, very like rich potential place to study human emotion because there's so much pressure and there's so many demands. Um, but we'll see. Maybe in my next postdoc or something.
Definitely
Yeah,
excited. I
yeah.
remember actually, I read something similar to this about like a paper about like how people can develop higher self-efficacy.
Hmm.
Um, I remember thinking about this because I remember seeing in an interview, it was like a Leffen interview, like from way back, like 2014 or something, where he talked about like what he does when he feels anxious at the tournament or whatever, and I thought it was super interesting because it was like not something that I would have thought of at the time, where it was like he was like, "Oh yeah, I always try to think to myself that like this is the emotion that I came here to feel. Like this is like exactly what I'm trying to come here to experience. So this is what I want. This is what I am trying to experience." And I'm like, "That's so weird. Why would you do that?" But like, and then I read a bunch of these papers, and I'm like, "Oh, it's attribution of
That's
arousal."
great,
Like,
actually. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And if you extend, the idea from the other study about well, some of the or some of the emotional energy has to do with threat, right? If you can convince yourself in any way that it's not threat, it's challenge, maybe that'll give you an
Yeah,
edge.
yeah. Well, this is definitely more than three papers worth of work by itself, but I think we should maybe
That's
potentially
okay.
move on to
That
the
was
to the
chapter two, but the first study of the dissertation only.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So the second part of your thesis is, if I remember right, it's about women in the Smash community in particular.
So well, we can talk about that one first if you'd like. But
Uh-huh.
this was specifically about women who don't play games and trying to
Right,
see how
right. So
they, yeah.
okay, So tell me a little bit about this,
Okay,
because clearly I'm
okay.
misremembering the order.
That's okay, that's okay. So, one thing, I've been a gamer my whole life, and that's been challenging in many different ways in terms of gender, right? And so one thing that I hated was that growing up, I knew one other girl that played games. And I knew I always ended up hanging out with the guys because they're the ones who I could talk to about Pikmin or Smash or whatever other thing I was doing at the time that I really enjoyed. And so I started thinking about why don't girls play games? Obviously, that's an entirely question that people have already written multiple books on. But one factor that might have to do with it is when they walk into a tournament and they see that it's just like 15 guys and they're the only girl. And even if the guys don't do anything weird, right? Like even if there's no flirting or gatekeeping or anything like that, um, just the fact that gender, you just become a minority for existing for something you can't control or change, that might have some impact on the way they think about their skill, or we think whatever. So one way to think about that, or one phrase that for that effect, is stereotype threat. So the idea that just because you are different and that difference is highlighted in some way, whether direct or indirect, that's going to take up some of your brain space that you could otherwise be using to learn the game or play or whatever, enjoy yourself at a local. Um, and even if you like me, I always thought, oh, it doesn't matter that I'm a girl. But the fact that I had to think that, no other guy in the room had to think that. No other guy in the room had to be like, oh yeah, it's not a big deal that I'm a guy, right? Like even trying to cope takes up more brain space than somebody else who has nothing to cope with or nothing to reconcile between their identity and the activity or the social setting that they're in. So I wanted to look at specifically small tournaments. So, like I said, like 15 people, whatever. Bring in a bunch of people who have no idea what they're doing. And I tell them straight up, none of you know how to play this game. We're going to spend an hour. I'm going to teach you some basics, and then you're going to come back and play each other. And then I wanted to see, okay, does having a 50-50 split of men and women result in the same like performance as a group of all women, right? And in a perfect study, I also would have done groups of all men, but I didn't really want to do that. That already exists in nature. Um, so 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 yeah, I had these two experimental conditions where I brought people in. Nobody's good at Smash. Nobody's ever competed. Teach them the basics. They come back, all play each other just round robin style, and I see. I mean, I also asked them before they came in, what other games do you play? How good are you? Or what experience do you have? And yeah, what I found was that the women that came in and just played with other women, not only were their anxiety levels lower at the end of the tournament, but they actually performed better. And that's not because like they got a boost. In fact, it's because in the condition where there was a co-ed cohort, there were it, the women in the co-ed cohorts were losing every game against the men, even ones that they were theoretically better than. Like there's women that say, oh yeah, I play Smash like once a month, and there's men that it's like, I've never played this game before, and a woman might still lose to him even though she has vastly more experience or plays like 15 hours a week of other video games. And that's like that. Some of those numbers in the study are just really stark. If they're equally skilled, women almost always lose in the co-ed setting. If a woman is more skilled, women also almost always lose in the co-ed setting. And I'm putting in all these statistical controls. I'm doing all this self-selection. I tell them at the beginning of the study, you all suck. Well, nicely. And there's still this effect that when they walk in and sit down next to a guy with a controller, there's some, I don't know, is it a voice in their head that's saying like, oh, this guy probably is going to beat me? Maybe that's rooted in their life experience where guys were more were better at games, and so they just have this expectation. Or maybe it's like, oh, because I'm a girl, I can't do well. They sound similar, but they are different things. And so I wanted this study to be like, I give them an emotion regulation manipulation, and then see like if the people who could cope, or who I teach how to regulate could actually regulate better, but there was no effect there. Again, because I believe it takes too much effort to regulate when you're just trying to remember what the buttons on your controller
Yeah,
do,
yeah.
or play at a high level, whatever context we're talking about. Um, yeah, and of course, there's some qualitative component of this I mentioned earlier, that when I was in the room with all these other women and everyone knew we all suck or whatever, right? And there's just like, oh, I need to play every other person in this room. There was laughter and joking and, oh my God, how did you get Kirby to do that? Um, by the way, men and women pick Kirby equally when they're inexperienced at the game.
I was actually wondering.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
super funny.
I think Kirby is just very non-threatening, no matter your gender.
Yeah, no, he's very soft and cute. I
And
think it's
the
very
jumps.
funny how frequent he is as a character. Because this is just like, because I used to run the Smash Club at my school, and it's just wild how people gravitate towards Kirby. Like him in particular, he's just like the casual character. Like you'd think
Yeah,
it'd be like Link or Mario or something, but no, people just
somebody
love
well known.
Kirby.
No,
Yeah.
it's I love it. It's ironic. Oh, my shirt is a parody, and Kirby in Inflato Ball is this is what representing Kirby on this
Nice.
Nintendo shirt, but it's clearly not a Nintendo knockoff or anything.
Not copyright infringement.
Oh no, no, don't add me to that list.
Yeah.
Although I do have to look up legally if I'm allowed to use Super Smash Bros. Melee in the title of a manuscript or not.
Oh, that's actually a very interesting question. I wonder if
Yeah,
they can cease and desist the journal that you're publishing in. That'd be
right. Well, it's interesting
it'd
because
be great press if you got that actually.
the local researcher loses entire career because Nintendo can't handle their game being mentioned. And
That's very funny.
yeah, there have been when you Google like go to Google Scholar or your library or whatever and try to find Smash research, there is some use of it, but they've all been really low impact
Hmm.
studies. So I don't know. Maybe I'll just take the chance. Maybe I'll put Melee in there and see what
Yeah, yeah.
happens.
Um, was I? Yeah. So I had a lot of very fun thoughts because I think you got a great result for this chapter in particular. Like I
Mhm.
think that the effect size that you saw was pretty dramatic.
Oh yeah.
So I thought that was super great. I thought it was a very great motivating example for Smash Sisters in particular.
Mm.
Because I have like a lot of friends that are involved with Smash Sisters whenever it's in at a major or anything, and I think a lot of people don't get it.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people are just like, oh, well, we're Super Smash Brothers, and it's like you're playing it. I don't understand. Um, but I think that the environment that you describe sounds very familiar to me,
Mhm.
just from like the experiences of other people that I know that have done Smash Sisters in particular.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the idea that they're all playing better is I think like a very fun, motivating example for like, oh yeah, like this is an exhibition, but like we all play extra well when we're playing other women, so it's like a more like a far less threatening environment to be competing in, which is very fun. Um,
Yeah, I commentate several Smash Sisters, and it's actually the same kind of effect for me on the mic as when I've commented pools at like Low Tier City or Smash and Splash, and I'm like, oh my god, I can't get anything wrong, or there's gonna be dudes in Twitch chat all over this saying all women suck, right? But when I'm commentating Smash Sisters, first of all, we don't have a chat, which is great.
yeah, that's
But
great.
also, like, I'm usually sitting next to somebody who's like just as invested and like chill with what's going on as me. I don't have to sit there and wonder like, oh, is my co-commentator gonna like flip something on me to prove his dominant, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, just weird
There,
thoughts.
yeah. I don't have those worries. They
Yeah,
don't come into my head. Whether you're a player or yeah, involved. Yeah, otherwise. Oh,
yeah, no.
there. Were,
Oh, go
oh,
ahead.
well. So in my results, I discussed the anxiety and the performance, but then there's also one result I didn't talk about was how they perceived their own skill. So in the women only cohort, and actually men in the co ed cohort, if you ask them, how well do you think you did compared to everybody else? It actually is almost a perfect line with how well they actually did, right? Like, if they beat everybody, they're going to rate themselves 10 out of 10. And if
Yeah,
they
yeah,
lost everybody, but the women in the co-ed cohort, they could have been actually, they could have performed literally as well, like totally average, won as many as they lost, and they would rate themselves as like the bottom 25%.
that's
So
wild. Yeah,
yeah, there's like a confidence or self-efficacy component to this as well. So it's not just like I'm anxious and I fail. It's like I'm anxious and I fail, and that means I'm bad because I'm a girl, or what
yeah, yeah,
there's so many layers. Yeah.
yeah. I frequently I bring this up to people. The idea of like ego depletion.
Mm.
I think stereotype threat for me it's like a lot easier to understand if thinking about it in terms of ego depletion. Um, there's a really fun study where they made two groups do like arithmetic problems, and for one group they made them eat cookies before they did the arithmetic problems. So like that was a control condition. Like, oh, eat a fun cookie and then do like 3 plus 5. Um, and then the other one's like you must eat all of these radishes. They're just like raw radishes. They taste terrible. And they had to choke down the radishes, and they did the same problems, and they like overwhelmingly would just always do worse. Like you have to spend all your cognitive resources chewing on these radishes. It's miserable, and then you got to do the same thing as the other guy that gets to eat a cookie. Um, so I think stereotype threat is like a very fun analogy, right? Because it's like maybe the task is the same, and maybe you're like the same level of good at it, but like you have to deal with the radishes, right?
Yeah,
Like you have to be like, no, it's fine. It doesn't matter that my gender is XYZ. Like that's you eating a radish, right? And
yeah.
it's like, uh, so that's always one that comes to mind because it's
It's a
like,
good metaphor. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, cool.
Literally picturing eating a radish right now. Not
Yeah,
not
it's
great.
not a fun experience in your
No.
mind. Um, but yeah, no. So I think that I think if you have other published works along these lines, I definitely would love to read them because I think that this is like a very very fun like it appears in your mind when you read it, right? Like
Mhm.
this environment of all these people shouting and being really excited, um, which made it I think very very fun to read.
Hmm.
So definitely really really cool work.
Good. I submitted that thinking it was like the most clear study I could submit, and they rejected it saying this isn't actually stereotype threat. Um, so I have some theoretical arguments to make
Yeah,
about
yeah,
why literally this is when people, maybe I didn't read them a passage about how women perform less well than men, but look at the effects. Isn't it
yeah.
clear that
It's
they
a big
believe
effect
that?
size.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
I don't know what
So,
you would call that other than stereotype threat.
so the reviewer suggested I talk about cohort effects, which is I don't know. I'm still a little salty about that one, so I haven't started revising that one yet. We'll see.
Yeah, it's all good. That's academia for you.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so let's move on to the third part of your thesis, which is I think also quite interesting. It's the if I remember right, this is just like the gaming culture in general, like
Hmm.
accessibility to women and minorities, right?
Hmm.
So talk to me a little bit about this.
Yeah. So um, this was a survey-based study. So I just asked people, tell me about your experience throughout your life, playing video games. How did you discover them? Have you ever experienced anything negative in gaming context? It was just very large survey, not only with like these short answer questions, but also like personality variables, um, gaming experience variables. So like gaming self-efficacy, how good do you believe you are at games? How much fun do you have when you play? How confident are you in your ability to compete? How much do you play competitive games versus solo games versus cooperative games? All these other things, right? Um, so I've got a bunch of variables for these people, how much they game. I've got a bunch of variables about their personality, so things like how masculine and feminine they believe themselves to be, or how much they believe or they relate to their category, gender category, or like the category of gamer or the category of esports player. And then I've got these short answer questions, which were very rich data that I still need to.
Yeah, that looks hard to comb through.
It's well, and it's super interesting. So I just sit there like reading like 200 people's life experiences with how they first played games, and I just want to like spend my afternoon, doing that
Yeah,
and not
yeah,
thinking about it scientifically. Um, and what I wanted to accomplish with this study was, I believe, because I've been in gaming so long and because I've been part of the Smash community, I have access to a lot of gamers, non, like, I'm not just, I'm not working just with like whatever college students are taking Psych 101, right? Like, I've been in the community, talking to people, getting their feedback, building up trust, or well, depends on who you ask. I guess some people will never trust me after code of conduct stuff, but that's not okay. Um, anyway, I have access to these people who have unique experiences that most researchers can't just walk in and get 50 to 100 women to fill out a survey on fit or gamer self-identified gamer women, right? Like people
yeah,
who
yeah.
say I play 15
Very
hours a
hard to
week.
find that in the
Yeah,
wild.
yeah. Like there's that's one problem with a lot of the established gaming literature is that either it's an all male sample or they've got like you know, for women that qualify. Like, there's just such a huge participation difference right now that all the conclusions are being drawn about men, but who knows whether or not it's true about women, or what like different factors are impacting the gender differences. You know, there's a lot there for all of science to try to solve. But yeah, for this study, I'm um, basically, what are the group differences between the ones who still play video games and the ones who don't? What about people who are non-binary? What about people who are transgender? Like, how are all these things and what we believe about ourselves and how we think of ourselves impacting our desire to play video games, and also how long we end up sticking around in those contexts? So it's kind of a big study just because I took so many variables. Um, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to start with.
Well, I do have a bunch of very interesting like threads that I got from reading this, but I do think that how do I put this? I think that the interesting thing here is how much of it is socialized versus how much of it would be like quote unquote innate. So I always the way I always like talk to people about it, right, is you know, Smash is not really like a intensely physical activity, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's not like a sport where like you could be like, okay, well, like your musculature depends on defines how well you're going to perform, right? Um, and there's always talk about like, you know, innate biological differences between men and women when it comes to competitive activities in general. And I've never really like been one to really believe that, like just as like a blanket statement, because the one example I always point to is like a riflery. I don't know if you've ever looked at a like sport shooting.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, so it's one of the very few sports in the NCAA that are co-ed. So men and women are actually not separated. They have one ranking list,
Mm.
very similar to our game. Um,
Now that you mentioned this, I think recently in the Olympics there was some somebody was like, that woman's not holding the gun right, and then she like got first place or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
no,
so okay, I know what you mean.
it's very fun to think about, right? Because
Yeah,
the gender balance in riflery is very balanced.
yeah.
It's gender separated at like the professional level, but that's really just because like sports at the professional level are gender separated.
Mhm.
Like if you look at the scores that are put out by men and women at the professional level, they're like about the same. They're the ranking system for collegiate athletes is like very much a mix, like pretty even 50-50 between men and women. Like there's no real edge of one over the other. Um, and you know, I always think about that, right? And I'm like, why is our game not like that? Why is our game not evenly gender balanced? I don't think that there's any real competitive effect. And like the answer I always come back to thinking about it is that it's probably socialized in some way. So I think that your work here in this chapter kind of speaks to that a little bit. So I think with that in mind, I'm sort of interested in that perspective from this
Yeah,
chapter from you.
yeah. So when I originally proposed this dissertation study to my committee, there were actually components of like getting actual reaction time and working memory capacity and some other things that we might think of as like talent in Smash. Um, but COVID kind of messed with that, so it just became just a survey study. So full disclosure, although I'm describing social effects, I didn't in this study measure any kind of quote innate talent effects or hormones or whatever. Um, that being said, I'm totally on the same page as you as far as like theoretically, Smash should not be there. I don't think there's any innate um, um, thing that makes you think differently in the. Okay, this is always a hard conversation because people are like, oh, but there are testosterone differences, and I'm like, yeah, but is testosterone like making a difference in motivation? Competitiveness, or is it actually changing cognition in the second by second level? Because I can see the argument for overall motivation, but I don't see the argument for like for some
Yeah, like
reason,
decision to decision, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
like trying to decide where to the eye is not going to be influenced by how much testosterone is coursing through your veins, even if you are experiencing heightened testosterone due to a physiological reaction, right? Like those two things might be correlated but not causal anyway. So yes, so most of this I was looking at these social factors that I think a lot of men particularly take for granted. And so earlier in the podcast, I talked about how like I was the only girl on the playground that wanted to talk about games. Or like if I brought a video game guide to read at recess, the teacher would take it away. But if the boys brought video game guides, they could keep them and read it at recess, right? And I'm just wondering, how much like of when I was like 8, 9, and 10, those experiences um, did or did not encourage me to still game in my adulthood. And is that true for everybody, right? Like, what if someone like was assigned male at birth and that's not who they are, but like that was still something that was socially acceptable, like the teacher wouldn't take away their game guide. um, and how all these things interact to contribute to the probability of playing video games a lot, or at all, right? Or even being open to the idea of playing. And so there were three kind of concepts that I tried to link together in this. So access, experience, and interest. So access is this component I'm talking about in terms of I got my game guide taken away. I didn't have girlfriends that I could talk to about video games, or I had one. We played Harvest Moon together, and we played, took turns on Final Fantasy, like Secret of Mana, like um, borrowing her Golden Sun game. Like that was a good friendship for a while. Um, you know, but that was like the only person I had. And then like every night I was writing my dissertation, my spouse was in the other room with his Discord of 10 guys that are all on voice chat talking about their games. And they're on game number 15 out of in the month that like they've tried, right? And like there's
Yeah, yeah,
so much more like information being exchanged and expertise being shared. Like no, they're not just they're not sitting there alone like I was like in the help section of Final Fantasy 14 trying to figure out how to change my class, right? They're just like,
yeah,
hey dude, how do you change your class? And then somebody just like, oh yeah, you just switch the weapon out. Um, so there's this social transfer of knowledge that different people have access to because of what other people think of them. Like it's not that I didn't want to talk about games. It's that other people looked at me and said, that person doesn't know about games, or that person only likes games to get male attention, or something like that, right? Basically the way other people think of us, the opportunities that other people present to us, those impact our ability and our willingness to do a thing. Especially a hard thing like getting good at Smash, or
yeah,
failing over and over again in a fighting game. If I think maybe I'm failing at this fighting game because I've got 10 years less experience than the guys that played fighting games all throughout their adolescence, you know, that's gonna affect me. So that's the access component of the study. Is literally I asked people, who's the first person you played games with? And men overwhelmingly, I think out of like 7 different categories, like 53% said friends. And for women, only 8% said friends. Uh, the rest of that percentage was distributed between siblings, parents, and like significant others, that kind of thing. So I think that there's a really strong social component to gaming, and there's a lot of research that's been done on, men's friendships don't look like emotional disclosure; they look like doing shared activities together, right? Um, Whereas women's friendships are all about social disclosure. Um, and that could be one reason why we see such big gaming differences, is this difference in access. Oh, okay. So that's one general concept. Another general concept is interest. So why did I want to read about video games on the playground and other people didn't? And I did find some evidence that women who like thinking about systems uh, tend to gravitate towards video games. So these questionnaires are asking things like, when you're on a train, are you thinking about how the routes connect? When you get a new piece of furniture, do you read the directions before you build it? Are you interested in strategy? Do you enjoy thinking about how air conditioners work? I don't know.
yeah, yeah.
They're a little actually more gender neutral than the ones I just described. But basically, do you like systems? Do you like thinking about how things work and how they influence each other and impact each other? And generally speaking, men tend to score higher as a population on those measures of interest, and women tend to not score as high. And again, that could be a result of any number of things. But generally speaking, that's the pattern. What I'm finding is that women who play more than 10 hours per week have the same scores of interest. Um,
That's
in these,
interesting. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
these systematizing topics. So there's something about games that that scratch that itch for people. So maybe there's a difference in interest, right? Um, Another measure I had of interest was how much they played across their lives. So I asked them, okay, when you were ages 5 to 12, how many days per week did you play games? When you were 12 to 15, when you were 18, what about now? And look over time who ends up playing more, who ends up playing less, right? And with women, there's a really steep drop off around puberty. So they actually might be playing 4 or 5 days a week when they're 8 to 12. And then suddenly, if in particular they relate to the identity of womanhood, if they feel like I'm a girl, a girly girl, in fact, or, if they feel like they're a member of their gender category, that's it's like this total drop off. It's actually the cisgender women was the only group that played less on average video games from childhood to adolescence than any of the other categories.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so there's this. So the question is, is it interest in? There's both this interest in systems and there's this identity component of like maybe you lose interest because you think it doesn't overlap with who you are anymore. Um,
Yeah, that also jumps out at me as like potentially social, right? Where
mhm.
it's like less I think that a lot of the naysayers would say that this is indicative of a biological difference that emerges at puberty, but I don't necessarily think that would be the case either, right? Like I think that this has a lot more to do with your like what is the definition of uh being a member of your gender category,
Mhm.
right? Like that's like a very highly social definition, right? So that's super interesting. That especially like given that that's the only group that appears to. That's very very interesting.
Oh yeah, yeah, and there's a lot of so I did some developmental work. Kids can be the way kids' minds develop is really interesting, but I never would have drag another 4-year-old child into an experiment room again. So I don't do developmental research anymore, but I know enough about how gender stereotypes form and the human brain. So early on, it's much easier to say like this is red and this is blue, and these things are separate and we categorize. Human brains are great at categorizing and creating heuristics to sort things into categories because it makes our lives easier. Like, is that thing edible? Is it not?
Yeah, yeah.
Can I write with that? Can I, there's so many judgments we make all the time. And early on, we are told again and again and again and again and again clothing colors, reactions to our pain, that the categories of man and woman are extremely important in deciding everything about you, your future, the tone of voice you use with other people, what kinds of sports you can play, if you're punished or not for crying. These gender categories are introduced so early, and the human brain, when we can't even think beyond that really until age 12. That's when we start abstracting. But you've already taught the 4 and the 8 and the 10-year-old child that these categories are salient, right? Like by the time they get abstract thought, it's too late. You've already shaped
Yeah,
their
yeah.
entire life for them to be based on are they blue or are they pink?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's social. And I think it's interesting that you can get like a 1-year-old baby or a 2-year-old baby to be surprised to see a man putting on lipstick. That means that they've already they've seen people putting on makeup enough times, and they've seen only their female caregiver putting on makeup enough times that they're surprised at 2 years old. Oh my god, we have so much work to do. Like we there's so much we have to undo before we even have a chance for kids who have grown up not being having like so much of their life already pushed upon them by other people based on gender categories. Oh, I hate it. um I'm sorry. That's my.
No, no. So it's funnily enough, the thing that jumps out at me is a lot of like my own work within machine learning,
Mm,
um, because like a lot of cogsci people that get into machine learning, I just want to talk about people all the time, about how we're so good at a lot of things. We're so interesting, just as like creatures that learn. Um, and there's there's really something to be said about how good humans are at categorizing, not only just at building the categories, but out of abstracting new categories from very very few information. Um, and I think that that's like one of the biggest things that'll jump out at you if you ever do machine learning research, because it's like oh yeah, I can train this thing that achieves like human expert level performance at differentiating these two categories, but I need like 50 million examples. It's like, you can show like a 2-year old like a novel shape, and you're like, this is a dax. And then you can show them like 50 other shapes, and one of them is the same shape as your dax, and you'd be like, where is the dax? And they'll go right to it, and they'll be like, this is your dax. It's like it's so hard to train machine learning models to do the same thing, because it needs to have a very very strong awareness of like what it means for a category to exist. Like it needs to reason about itself, about its own taxonomy of categories, and it's just like having to build that. You do actually get a lot of information about gender as a very young child, and it's like you build this extremely rigid category, and it's actually not rigid at all. It's actually very malleable.
Oh
So I
yeah,
think it definitely plays a large part in like the crazy social effects that you see emerge out of very young children for this.
yeah. I mean, to be honest, I was kind of nervous about doing this research because of this. If I'm asking about childhood, that means I also probably need to ask about gender assigned at birth or sex assigned at birth versus gender. And I mostly identify as cis. I use they pronouns because I don't want it to matter. I also use she pronouns, so don't feel bad if you've always used she for me. But like, I'm not someone who puts up every single day with being misgendered or told that like I'm innately one thing. Um, so I wanted to be sure that when I did this research and when I talk about like assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth, and how those are different experiences, to not invalidate people's the entire spectrum of gender that is. Like there's so many ways to express yourself and so many ways to think of yourself. And I gotta say, this research showed me that there's a lot of queer people out there who just love games for the ability to explore identity and social roles and everything. And I'm so into that. Um, as a queer person, that is also one reason I really love games. But I wanted to be really cognizant of this is something that people categorize you on, and though yes, there are probably differences in how other people treated you at some point. That does not mean that the way you're living now is fake or bad or anything like that. So this was really difficult for me because I didn't want to hurt anybody. Like that's the last thing I want to do with my research because there's so much anti-trans and uh, well, anti-queer, anti-everything, and
Yeah.
racist, like all everything. Academia has a lot of problems because a lot of people that have been doing work have been the same kind of person for many, 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 many years. Um, yeah, so I just wanted to thank, I guess, there were so many people who I consulted, or I would just tweet out and be like, oh my God, I don't know how to handle this one part. Can somebody please help me? And there were so many people that were willing to come forward and be like,
I loved
you know,
whenever you made those types of tweets because
good.
it really warmed my heart as someone that also did research, that like you cared about the ethical questions, and that like all these people from the community that you were working in like just emerged to help you. Like every
Yeah,
single time you had one of these tweets, it was like that.
yeah.
So
It made and there were so many people that participated that identify as non-binary or trans. I felt trusted and I felt like, oh, thank you.
that's like it's a hard group to get measurements for, right? Like even just like because like so when I was doing work in a lab for gaming, once I graduated, I like left the school, and like the research effort just died because like it's impossible to get access to like expert game players if you're not already in the community, and you don't know what tournaments you got to go to or whatever. Like if you're just
Yeah,
like you know 50-year-old guy that's the chair of your department, like you're not going to know where
yeah,
GamerCon is, right?
no.
It's like a so just thinking about like progressively more niche subjects, non-binary people within a niche gaming community certainly sounds like the most impossible group of people to gather information for of all time. So the fact that you had like a pretty solid amount of them in your sample pool was like very very cool, I thought.
I mean, I think it also speaks to changing norms. I think I'm so excited to see the next, 2 or 3 generations and how we choose to express gender or, not. Or
Yeah, yeah.
there's a lot of changes happening, and that's great.
No, I definitely agree. So
Um,
let's like yeah,
you
sorry,
need me
yeah.
to stop?
No, no, no.
Okay, there's only one last part that I wanted to cover.
Yeah, go for
Um,
it.
So I talked about access and interest, and the last part is experience, and I think that's actually what the most research out there is on. So experiences of harassment or othering. So I asked everybody what kinds of negative experiences did you have in gaming, and the two big things that came out of that. First of all, I had no idea that aggression caused so much interpersonal conflict with men. So, I'm just talking about, oh yeah, men use each other's friendships to like access gaming and stuff. But there's also a lot of friendships that end because somebody gets salty about a game, or because somebody like becomes a dick, or like falls down an alt right rabbit hole or
Right,
something,
right.
right? Like it turns out that a lot of the breakdown in men's relationships around gaming doesn't have to do, has to do with aggression and anger at each other. I didn't expect that. And I think that speaks to gender norms and how they limit people and how they limit male friendships, right? Oh, the fact that men are expected to only express a certain kind of emotion, and usually it's anger, like that is going to strain people in their relationships. So that was interesting. Didn't expect that. Would love to do more research on that. But also then, of course, replicating the findings that women experience harassment of all kinds. Game throwing, active harassment, passive harassment, getting hit on, threats, all of that. My work replicates what anybody could have already told you about. If you, and I should say, anybody who's like voice on voice chat doesn't sound like a 30-year-old dude, right? So if you have been modulating your voice to sound different, people are going to pick up on that and try to throw slurs at you, homophobic slurs or whatever else, right? Um, yeah. So that experience component, I think obviously that's one thing that actually could be a first step. Like, okay, we should punish people more for, or like incentivize inclusion or punish exclusion or whatever else. But what I think after doing this whole dissertation project is like that experience component. Like women don't stay in gaming because we get exhausted of all that shit and we just leave. Um, it's not worth it. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
that's why I played solo games for about 8 years, right? Like the Smash community was the first time I'd really come back into a place where I wanted to talk about games with other people. Um, but like the experience is already a result of everything else. And so it's, as much as we can study it because it's there, it's in behaviors that we can measure on Twitch chat. I know that there's someone who did Smash research on like Smash boards and the link between gendered words and positive and negatives. There's a lot.
I bet that's rough.
Yeah, there's,
Just remembering my time on Smashboards, I definitely
yeah.
definitely do not expect that to be a very positive correlation.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I tried to get pieces of access, interest, and experience, and of course, the experience things weren't that surprising in terms of women or just non cisgender men, but you know that's the reality, and that was my dissertation.
Yeah. It's so odd to me that that last component about harassment. Um yeah, I remember like a year and a half ago. Um like if you brought this up, people like would be cynical about it being a real thing, which is so it was just always so odd to me, right? Cuz it's like, you know, like relative to the amount of men in the community, like I guess there aren't that many women, right? Like if you're like if you select a random friend group within the male community, like maybe there's like a high probability that there's no women in it. But it's like I feel like you talk to literally any woman that has done anything anywhere near gaming and they have stories upon stories of harassment that they get levied upon them. So like the fact that people think it's like not a real thing is so unusual to me. And I think that that attitude, I guess, is people are starting to believe that all of the research that's been done on this and all of everyone's experiences that they've all said is actually true. Um, but it's just always weird to me that like this was like a controversial thing within our community for so long. That it's like, oh, there's no harassment. Everyone's so nice. It's like,
There's a
okay,
lot. There's
yeah,
layers to why people might think that or believe it or disbelieve the people who are telling the stories. But yeah, I mean, about a year and a half ago or 2 years or however long it's been, it kind of became clear that it's not just mouth
people
breathers
making
on
things
Twitch
up.
chat.
Yeah,
Yeah, that like
yeah.
yeah.
But let's end this on a more positive note.
Yeah.
Well, so let's wrap up like the implications, right? So
Oh,
I
yeah.
know that early on in your paper, you talk about so like obviously this is all very relevant to us as people that exist within the Smash community, but I think there are broader implications, and you mentioned science, technology, engineering, math as one
Mm,
particularly valent place that this could have implications. Um, and when I read that, I immediately my mind went to the Google memo. I don't know if you remember that,
yeah.
um, where this guy published his paper about how it's like, oh, all of this is discriminating against men because it's innate biological differences. Um, and I think that a lot of your work stands in direct contrast with a lot of the ideas put forward in that. So I want to hear your thoughts specifically on how this type of work can impact areas outside gaming as well, not just like within our little community.
Yeah. So actually, one of my other publications is specifically on children's stereotypes about scientists. So if you ask a kid to draw a scientist, at a certain age, they'll just draw whatever they are. Kids are really egocentric when they're young.
There's a
Um,
lot of work on the child as scientist out of the probabilistic reasoning people.
yeah, yeah.
So that's really funny, actually.
Yeah, yeah, no. You ask them to draw a person of any kind, and they draw themselves, and same goes for scientists. But around age 12, suddenly all the men are still drawing men, and all the women are drawing men. All of a sudden, around age 12, and so actually, there's a lot more research in STEM than there is in gaming with gender and stuff. But if I were to give like a what is unique about doing it in Smash is that we're all here willingly, right? Like there's a lot of STEM research where it's a confound that people in STEM fields make more money, and so even though women aren't inherently interested in it, they are trying to claw their way out of poverty, and so they go and get that computer science degree or that molecular biology or engineering. Um, so what's interesting about gaming, I think, is this will be maybe one of the there's less incentives like that to create any kind of opposing effect. But what does it mean? I guess I hope that this work gets somebody to think about why games are the way they are differently. And I hope that maybe, some team owner or some player will be able to sit back and think, maybe there has been a difference, right? And maybe instead of just recruiting people that are good, we should offer more opportunities for people to become good. Or instead of like having a token girl and telling her to suck it up when when her teammate calls her a B word or whatever, like maybe I should take that seriously, right? That's what I want most from this work is like people recognizing emotions matter. Your performance state is deeply embedded in your emotional reactions, which are deeply embedded in physical and biological responses to stimuli around you. And uh, the experiences of women reflect a different reality environment surrounding it. And so maybe we should think about that environment, thinking about changing it um, or improving it in some way, or supporting people who aren't, the typical gamer in different ways. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that was great. Yeah, I do think that I really do hope that this work gets some eyes on it because I do think that reading through it, I had a lot of I thought it was very challenging in a lot of places, right? Like I thought it was very thought provoking. Um, I think that if people like looked at the results, like even if it was just like a condensed version that people could read through, um, I'm sure you have a poster that you,
Yes,
but
there have been a
yeah,
few. Yeah.
um, but I think you know just thinking through it, right? Just trying to reason through your own experiences within the community and how you perceive other people that exist within the same community within you. I think that it's very tempting to just pattern match your own experience onto other people.
Mhm.
Um, you know, like everyone thinks the same way as me. Everyone has had the same experiences with me. Everyone likes the same things. Everyone dislikes the same things. Um, and I do think that if anything, if people could move past that a little bit and realize that like maybe their experience is not necessarily representative of every other person that exists within our community, it would make the existence within our community, I think, a little bit better for a lot of people. So I think this is a great work. I was super happy reading it. I'm very happy I got the chance to talk to you about it.
Thank you.
Um, so let's wind down a little bit.
Okay.
So we do have some questions, but before we get to the questions, there is a segment that we do on the show.
Okay.
Um, I don't know how we always does this. He always transitions to this so beautifully, right? He always talks about, oh, we're always talking about Smash all the time. We always talk to Smashers about Smash, but we're all people and we all do things that aren't Smash. So let's like talk for 2 minutes about what we've been doing outside of Smash related stuff. He always works this in somehow, and I never understand how it's been said. So this was a bit of a clumsy immediate jump. But Kyle, what have you been doing outside of Smash in the last week or so?
Nick All Star Brawl.
Yeah,
Is
tell me
that too
about this.
close?
So I
Is that
haven't
too close? No,
that
I'm.
okay. So I'll allow it. I haven't played it, so you can
That's
talk
okay.
about it to me a little bit. Tell me about
No,
Nick All Stars.
I just got it, like, and I'm trying to learn a box controller, and that's been challenging.
Oh, you're learning a box controller.
Yeah. Before that, I was playing a bunch of New World. I was really not excited about giving Bezos my money. But then the social component kicked in, and my spouse was walking the dog, and he's like, "If my cue pops, you gotta move around, okay?" And then I moved around, and then I fished, and then I was like, "Shit, this game's fun," and so I bought it. Um, I'm working as a postdoc in medical sciences right now, so I'm learning a whole lot about kidney cancer that I never knew before in my whole life.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
What type of work are you doing?
it's I'm basically a little paper writing monkey for these people. They needed a psychometrician, and since I have a statistics master's, I jumped in and I'm like, yeah, let's see how I can make my skills work. Um, but I'm looking at gaming related postdocs, but like this is a great learning experience for the next year or two.
Yeah, I think medical data is. I feel like we veered right back to academia, but
Oh well,
I
yeah.
think that I think that medical data is so interesting because it just feels like there's so many problems and there's so much data
Hmm.
and there's like just not enough eyes on it. Like it's funny you think
That's
about like all the people that become doctors and stuff. It's like they're not enough doctors. We need
yeah,
more doctors.
yeah,
It takes 8 years to become a doctor, and like literally every single person visits doctors all the time. So it's
yeah.
like,
And we need somebody to like look at all the data patterns of all these
yeah,
treatments
yeah.
doctors are doing. Yeah, yeah. So
So,
that's over the pandemic, I started collecting pins, enamel
oh yeah,
pins. Yeah, so that's my new thing. Right before we started, I was opening packages. I got a little. Oh, I watched Squid Game. That was great. I'm rewatching Cowboy Bebop because of the live action movie. Little girl dressed like Pikachu. Yeah, yeah.
nice.
Anyway, yeah. So normally I talk about D&D or acting in the fair, but those things haven't been happening really.
Oh
So
no, yeah, I guess that's because of the pandemic. I didn't
yeah.
even think about that. I know that there was a Renaissance fair near where I live a little bit
Mhm.
ago, and we didn't end up going because of COVID ramping a
Mhm.
little bit up recently.
Yeah, yeah.
But I didn't know you were in it. Though. That's cool.
Oh, I love acting. That's one reason I ever hopped on the mic in Smash at all. It was because I already felt like I could just talk about shit and people would listen somewhat.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah, but haven't gotten many opportunities. So a lot of it's trying new games at home, hanging out with my spouse and my doggy, and
nice.
collecting lots of pins.
Yeah, I guess for me within the last week, it's been a very busy week. 'Cause, I started my master's up recently, so I've just been doing homework all the
Oh
time. It's
gosh,
like an all my
that's a
time.
lot. Yeah.
But one thing that I have started doing, yeah, I made a tweet about it earlier, but I'm trying to make bento boxes in the morning because I'm trying to save me and my fiance some money because
Yeah,
we
yeah,
both get like food truck food when we
yeah.
go into the workplace, and it's like
Oh
$15 for a
yeah, it's
sandwich, and it's like,
yeah,
oh, I can't be doing this anymore.
yeah.
Um, I don't know how to make bentos, so like I made like lentil curry, and it was delicious. It's a Rainbow Plant Life. If you ever feel like lentil curry, it's like she's like a
Okay.
vegan
Yeah.
YouTuber. It's great. I'm not like vegan or anything, but sometimes I just go on her channel because her recipes are really good.
Yum.
I made this red lentil curry and I put it in, and I'm like, all right, bento boxes, color theory. And I put like some fruits and vegetables, and they're like four colors. And I put in like the rice at the bottom layer of the bento, and I'm like, I am so cool. I'm making bentos. This is great. And I hand it to my fiance. She's like, how do I heat this with fruit in it? I'm like, oh, how do you heat this with fruit in it? I don't know anything about bentos. I just made colorful food and I guess you have to eat the fruit before you heat it up. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. So that was a disaster, but that's what's been going on with me. Making bentos. Let's get to the patron questions. We do not have that many as normal. The patrons are very bad at giving us questions, so I'll ask a couple, and then maybe if anyone's in Twitch chat. Uh, so we have one from Curly W, which I thought was very funny. Have you ever been in the situation where you and your partner are at a friend's outdoor party and someone there says, "Hi, Kyle," and you both turn around?
Yes, that happens all the time.
Do you
It
ever get used to it? Is the follow
do
up
I get
question.
do I get used to it? Usually if somebody does it more than once, we establish like, okay, you're gonna call him Barnes, or you're gonna call me Pig, or it depends on the context. Or
Yeah,
like
yeah.
my mom calls me Kai. Like most of my family just calls me Kai. And so Kyle versus Kai is a little easier. um, it
Yeah,
is
no, okay.
I think it's a cute problem to have though.
Yeah, no, it's very
I'm fine
funny.
with this.
I remember, what was it? When Taylor Swift was dating Taylor Lautner way back when, and everyone was like, both gonna be Taylor Lautner.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it's
I didn't
funny.
take his name when we
Yeah,
met,
no,
but
I think
yeah.
that it's very smart that you did not take his name because I think it would have been very confusing. Um, so I thought that was great. But that was a fun question. Thank you, Curly W, for the question. Um, okay, we have one from YCZ, which I do not think is a good question, but I will ask it anyways because I
Okay.
love Leon. If each member of the five gods were a famous
Oh
psychologist,
my god,
who
no.
would they be?
Do I know five famous psychologists? I feel like fame is so relative. Like, if you're a social psychologist, you care about way more about Bandura than any
Yeah, yeah.
neuroscientist would, right? Like,
Especially if you're in gaming, you care about Bandura. It's
oh
like,
my,
oh yeah, that's definitely Hungry Bucks.
yeah. um, oh man, I don't know that anyone's a good match for Freud, and I don't know that anyone's a good match for Jung either. Um,
I agree that both of those don't really fit.
no, I'm trying to think like, what would Armada fit? What would Leffen fit? Who I should say, who would they fit? I don't know. I don't know how to answer this question. I'm sorry, but thank you
Maybe
for
you could
giving me
get back
something
to
to
him
think
on
about.
Twitter
Yeah,
after the show
yeah,
when you're in the shower and you're like, oh, I understand
yeah.
who Leffen is as a psychologist. We have a great question from Socks maybe in chat, so I'll open it up to chat. Um, how do you believe stereotype slash cohort threat will impact women and non-binary folks' performance in online tournaments compared to in-person tournaments?
So actually, I think online tournaments could potentially be a great equalizer because you're not sitting down next to the person. Um, However, if that were true, then why do we get so much crap even when we're playing Overwatch, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
CS:GO or any other kind of online game, right? There's still going to be harassment, but it's like so. Actually, this is something I think about a lot because on one hand, if somebody's sitting next to you, are they really gonna like call you a B word? Versus if they were like in a chat where they're anonymous, right? Like I don't know, maybe sitting next to you is protects you a little bit. But on the other hand, you just walked into the room and you saw that you're the only one out of 16 people. So I think online play could be really good, um, but it doesn't fix all of the like other stuff that came before. And the, some of the funny tweets during the pandemic in the Smash community have been like how people talk to each other, in the match, chat,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
or how salty they get, or terrible, or toxic.
It's really funny. It's really
Yeah.
bad because I always see those and I picture like the guy in the chair being like, "You'll never
Mm.
amount to anything as a player," and being like, "Bro, good luck in losers. I'm sorry."
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
Yeah, no. So I saw this question and I immediately thought of Wizards of the Coast put out because they have like a team that looks at data all the time,
mhm.
and they put out a tweet which was like kind of wild at the time, which was basically they looked at the gender distribution of Magic the Gathering online, and the gender balance was like really close to even. It was like 55-45. But like you go to any Magic the Gathering tournament, and it's like 99% men.
Yeah.
Um, and like a lot of people were like, "This is wrong. This cannot be correct." Uh, like it didn't even go away at like skill level. Like people would like filter it by the level of skill that it was, and it was just still pretty gender balanced. It's like, oh yeah, like turns out like women still like the thing. It's just that they don't want to be in this environment that's like they're gonna be the only women there. Um, so I think that the online tournament example is a really fun one. Uh, I do think it'll be a little bit to fix the culture stuff, but I do
Yeah.
think that the layer of anonymity is like very valuable. I think for avoiding that kind of stuff.
I like being able to just quit out of the game if some bad shit happens.
Hmm.
That's nice for me. Like if somebody's really or being able to mute them, that's not something I could ever do in person. I don't feel physically threatened by somebody else. So yeah, I think online tournaments could be an equalizer in some ways.
All right. Okay. So let's get one more. Let's get one more in before we end it. So this one is from our good friends over at Melee Stats, who I think must be a Nook on the Melee Stats account. Um, so one question I had for Kyle is, what factors played into the performance/expectations around trans men in the scene? Feel like that specific group of people in Smash is still relatively small, but definitely present.
Yeah, so uh, I didn't get any trans men in my survey. That's the only group.
Really?
Yeah, I got so many non-binary people of both sexes assigned at birth, and I got a lot of trans women, but I did not get a single trans man. And actually, I'm one of my friends of like 13 years is a trans man, and so I was like, bro, you didn't even do my survey. I know because not a single trans man did the survey, and he's like, oh, I didn't think. So shout outs to Ray. Um, anyway, uh, I think that yes. So one of my advisors is a little more old fashioned and asked me, well, do you think that these non binary people who were assigned female at birth transitioned in part so they could match the people around them a little better? Um, and
It's a
there are some
classic boomer thing to say. Yeah.
yeah, it was a very boomer thing to say, not gonna lie. But I still have to like engage with that question
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
try to like explain why or what I do or don't think. Um, I think that trans men, because of the way they were treated when they were assigned female at birth, like those early couple of years, are probably statistically less likely to play games just because they were afforded fewer opportunities. But I don't think there's anything stopping any after especially after transition. Um, I think there's a lot of opportunity for gender expression and exploration in gaming that could be really awesome and productive. But the question was about performance specifically, right?
I believe it was just expectations slash
Yeah,
performance. So
yeah. I think well, I think when your identity lines up with what you're doing, it feels good, no matter the situation. And so I think that it can be a very affirming and good experience. Maybe performance boosting, maybe just not, stereotype threat. I don't know. I'd have to talk to some trans men about it because obviously I didn't get any data on that.
no,
So
that's very interesting that you got zero. I was like, whoa, that that
yeah,
that was a shocker. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, you've been a great guest, and maybe this is selfish because I just got to talk about papers with another person that likes to talk about papers for like a couple hours. But I had a lot of fun. Uh, where can people follow you? Anything you want to shill or shout out? The floor is yours for this one.
Um, well, once I start publishing papers, y'all can retweet them and talk about the science. I think that'd be cool, but I'm not there yet. So, um, my gaming Twitter is at Dr. Piggy PhD. Um, as long as you're not like a harassing person, I'm usually down to talk and you can DM me or, I tweet quite a bit, so you can always engage in any way. Um, I love talking to people at tournaments about science, especially like if we're like drinking a beer or whatever, and then we can just like go off on this tangent. Um, so thanks for giving me the space to talk about this
Yeah,
stuff.
no, this was great research. So I was
Uh,
super excited to have you on.
I'm
Um,
I'm glad you have all this cognitive science background because we already are on like this vibe.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
All right. Next week we will have some guests that will be announced soon. Hopefully, Wheat returns from his road trip safe and sound, and I will not have to, unfortunately, not know what to say to end episodes. But have a great day, everyone. You've all been great. Thank you, Kyle, for coming with us.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Peace, guys.